everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge and welcome to another recommendations video. So today we have another recommendations video, kind of. This is another member voted on topic. So I've kind of ended up doing these 2 or 3 times a month now because I like to put out posts where I ask you guys what kind of recommendations you want, because I know a lot of you are here for the recommendations that I give, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. So I want to know the kinds of videos that you guys want to see. And then my channel members get to vote on topics that they want to happen for sure. And though I don't only make videos that are voted on by my channel members, I do like to try to make those a priority, right? And so out of the post where you guys gave me a bunch of options, the one that was voted on to be the next member supported video is Darkest Villains with an HEA. So this was really fun for me to put together because I really love villains and I really love the twist, the more twisted the better. And I love when they either will maybe become better, maybe they'll change for their love interest, or sometimes when they just don't. They just stay evil. This list has more so ones who don't change, who it's more so that their heroine comes down to their level. But there are a couple of them who do improve as well. But let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to get a couple of these out of the way that I think you're expecting to see from me, and then we'll get into some that are some historicals as well as some older favorites of mine. The first one I want to get out of the way because I'm sure this is what inspired this video, is how much that I talk about him. And that would be Carter Mahoney from Untouchable by Sam Mariano. Yes, this is a gorgeous cover, and I just want to lick this man. This is definitely not an 18-year-old body, but there you go. If for some reason you don't know, also a lot of these books are going to have trigger warnings in them because it's kind of what makes the character a villain, is the things that they've done. So this one, please look up the trigger warning for this book. Sam Mariano has a really great trigger warning in the front of this book, but this book actually starts with the hero assaulting the heroine. He is really horrible to her in a school classroom with 2 of his buddies looking on and kind of guarding the door. He assaults our heroine Zoe. And then after that, he is kind of struck by how brave she is and the way that she reacts to him when he does these things to her. And so he kind of becomes a stalker and becomes obsessed with her and tries to push her into a relationship with him. And I have waxed poetic and gone on for hours and days about how much I love Carter Mahoney. And though this book may have like some issues in how it's set up and how the plot plays out, one thing that pretty much any friend who has tried this book on my recommendation will tell you, they have never read a character like Carter before, and they've been surprised that they've been compelled by him. Even people who think that this book is like, they're like, this book isn't for me, you know, which is totally fair. That's why I don't generally just recommend this to people, even though it's one of my favorite books of last year. I understand that not everyone can handle it, and they aren't going to want to watch a guy who assaults a heroine get an HEA. But that's what this video is all about. At least half of the guys on this list assault their love interest. But there's just something about how compelling he is, and when we get little peeks into his brain and to see how much care he ends up giving to Zoe, there's no other way to explain it. Like, he ends up having a tender heart towards her, but he doesn't change who he is. It's more that Zoe adapts and realizes that she appreciates certain things about him. And I don't know, I really, really love it. I've reread this book multiple times. I've convinced lots of friends to read it. Some of them have loved it. Some of them haven't been able to handle it. And I understand either way. Like, I understand if it works and I understand if it doesn't, because he's not for everybody. But he had to be the first one mentioned on this list. The next one that has to be mentioned is Lothiare, the enemy of old, from the book by the same name, Lothiare. This is book 11 in The Immortals After Dark. And the thing about Lothiare is that we have been building up to this book. By the time you get to this book, you are so hyped to read it. You don't understand how he can be the hero of a book, even though in quite a few books, the ones like right before this one and a couple right after, there are some heroes that you're just like, how is this going to work? And yet Kresley Cole is able to get this compassion out of you for this person, even when we're seeing them do horrible things. So the setup of this one is that this is a world of fated mates. And Lothiare believes that his fated mate is this evil goddess of death named, wow, I just forgot her name because I literally don't care about it right now. What's her name? Soroya. Yeah. Is it Soroya? I think it's Soroya. The evil vampire. Yeah. Wow, I suck. But anyway. And that evil, like, goddess is indwelling this human woman named Ellie and doing horrible things with her body, like causing her to murder people and torture people and do all these, like, horrible things. And Lothaire's real happy about that because he's an evil vampire. And he wants to have a bride who is as crazy as he is and is as evil as he is and will help him make his goals come about. And he just can't believe for even a second that it would really be this human woman who would be his mate. And it's fascinating. Like, I don't know how, like, there's so little that I can say about this book. But those of you who've read it, you'd agree that he's one of the darker villains you know, and that the changes that he makes, because he doesn't stop being a vampire king, he doesn't stop being the enemy of old, but he learns how to have a family, which is a weird thing to say, and he learns to care about someone other than himself. And then there's Ellie, who puts this century-old being in his place. And this woman has nothing on her side but her wits and her body. And mostly just her body, because it's the body that is being indwelt by this evil goddess. And so she has something that Lothiare wants, the body that she has, because it's holding who he thinks is his bride. And the things that he will do to Ellie to get her to bend to his will, they are horrible. And the things he threatens her with, you just don't know how these two could work together. But through some of it's fated mate magic, and some of it is just Ellie is a fierce woman, and Lothiare just doesn't understand how a human could possibly stand against him and be a fierce competitor. This human woman specifically, and it's really beautiful to watch. And so, I mean, of the entire IAD collection, I have read this book 4 times, and it's always the one I want to go back to because I just love being in Lothaire's head and watching how this human woman is able to twist him in such interesting ways. So he definitely needs to be on this list. Then I got a bit of a throwback for you. I used to talk about this book a lot. When I first read about this particular villain, he was the evilest I'd ever read that was a human, because I had read some paranormal before. But when I stumbled across this book, I can't even remember how it happened, but this trilogy just took me to a very crazy place, and it introduced me to a lot of interesting stories. And that would be Julian from the Twist Me series by Anna Zaires. Oh my god, guys, this story. Julian is so human evil. Like, he is even more so than Carter, because Carter has his evil kind of centralized, and also he is able to be, like, not redeemed. Carter isn't redeemed, but by finding Zoe, he kind of is kept from being loosed on the world as a whole. And it's funny to me because in reflecting on this list, I really feel like parts of Julian are things that I would see in Carter, but Carter's able to be steered away from quite that level of evil, whereas like Julian is evil, and he's a billionaire, and he is a weapons dealer. He has a private island, and he actually kidnaps this girl named Nora on the day before her 18th birthday. He kidnaps her, takes her to his private island where he is a pilot and he's the only way off and on this island, and he keeps her prisoner there and uses her for his pleasure, forcing her, and eventually she like gets Stockholm syndrome. And I mean that in the actual sense of the word. Like this is a tale where, because Stockholm syndrome is when you start to like rationalize, you know, the arguments of your captor and or sympathize with them and or like, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but I do know that we often say Stockholm syndrome like to any Beauty and the Beast situation or stuff like that, and that's not true. Because it's not always equal. Like not all captor-captive situations are created equal, but this is one where Nora actually gets like drawn into the world and starts to, you know, use it for her benefit, because what else could she do? Like she is stuck with this evil man, and what else could she do but just learn to accept it and try to get the best out of it that she can. They don't end up staying on this island forever. Like there are some different situations throughout the whole trilogy, but I will say that Julian is probably one of the few characters on this list that I never liked him. I was compelled to continue reading this story, and I wanted to know what was going to happen next each time, but I never was like on Julian's side. I was more fascinated with how Nora was starting to accept what he was doing and realize like, I'm never going to escape this guy, so I'm just going to enjoy what I can, if that makes sense. Whereas pretty much all of these other villains that I'm talking to you about, I eventually like love them, you know, and I think that's part of the reason why I don't talk about this trilogy very often, because to me it still is one of the darkest things I've read, and it doesn't give me warm fuzzy feelings. Like I know it's not believable, but even times in Untouchable I had warm and fuzzy feelings for Carter. Like there are moments where he shows that he has tenderness, and there are situations where I'm like, you are still a child and there's a chance for you to be reformed, right? Julian is a fully grown man who abducted a child and turns her into his sex slave and then his bride eventually, right? And I never saw Julian's side ever, but I still like enjoyed this story. So Julian is a throwback for me because I read this I think I read this in 2019, which for my dark romance journey, is a while ago, right? Because I've been reading it for a while. So definitely if you haven't heard of this series, because it's a bit of an older one, this is like 6 years old already. It's pretty crazy. This is a bind up of all three, by the way. I ended up finding this on, I can't remember if I found it on Thrift Books at the time, but I got a really good deal on it. And I was like, I just gotta own it, because even though, again, I don't like fully enjoy it, I have a lot of good memories of it. Now we got some mafia men to talk about, all right? So let's start with my favorite villain, one of my favorite men that I read in 2020, and that is Ramo. Ramo Falcone from the Cora Chronicles. This is book 3. You really can't just jump into this one. I know it's not fun to say that to people, because when you are talking about a specific book in a series, but there are reasons for that, because you wouldn't appreciate Ramo to the level that I do if you hadn't have seen his character growth. And also a lot of Cora Reilly's stories like overlap with each other throughout the timeline. So you at least would need to start at the beginning of the Cora Chronicles. This starts with Twisted Loyalties, but to be fully satisfied, you'd probably want to start with Twisted Vengeance, or not Twisted Vengeance, with Bound by Vengeance, which is in the other series, but at least with the Cora Chronicles. But Ramo is the capo of the Vegas Camorra, which is one of the like 3 main mob groups that we see in Cora Reilly's world. And he starts this book by kidnapping Serafina, who is the niece of the boss of the outfit. So she's Dante Cavallaro's niece, Serafina. And she gets kidnapped on her wedding day. And he does this to get revenge against Dante and to get Dante to do something that he wants. And Serafina, who was about to be in an arranged marriage with Danilo, I think it's Danilo, Danilo ends up getting his book in Fragile Longing, which is a spin-off book that she has. But Ramo is... Everyone in the outfit and in Chicago and New York, they're all very frightened of the Camorra because they really don't have any rules, or at least that's what we're led to believe, right? I mean, of course, the opposition is going to think the worst of the Camorra. And I remember when I started the Camorra Chronicles, I was like, what am I getting into? I've heard such horrible things about them. But I actually love the Camorra even more than the other groups, just because they may seem like they don't have rules, but they actually have a lot more freedoms by that. Meaning, you know, there aren't as many arranged marriages happening and stuff like that. Anyway, it's a whole thing. But Ramo is a little unhinged, and he has it in his head that he's going to make Serafina his. And he goes about doing that in some interesting ways. So this is definitely a hate to love. Ramo appears to be the villain, and that's the thing. The reason why I particularly put him in this one, even though I don't consider him, after having read all the books, I don't consider him as dark as he seems. He is someone that is a looming figure over the second half of the Bound by Blood, the Born in Blood series. And so once we get to him and we see his family and we see his past, you're never quite sure what he might do. And even his own brothers and soldiers don't understand what he's doing with Serafina. But I just really appreciate it a lot. So Ramo Falcone is a very dark villain, and I love watching him and Serafina. Like some of the things that I highlight in this book. I can't wait to reread this again. I'm rereading all of Cora Reilly's Mafia books with my friend Jessin. It's her first time through. And I love Ramo so much. Then the other Mafia man I gotta mention is Mateo by Sam Mariano. Sam Mariano writes some great villains. So this is actually book 7 in the Morelli family. And so, you know, Mateo, he's someone we get introduced to in book 1, which is Accidental Witness, where he's definitely our villain in Accidental Witness. Again, trigger warnings for assault. Mateo actually assaults someone in that book, and someone that he ends up having a very interesting relationship with going through the series. This is the one I can literally say the least about, because I can't tell you all the things I love about Mateo and why, because it would ruin so much. But he is one of the darker men that I've met, and the way that so a lot of people in Mafia don't trust easily, right? Because there's always backstabbing happening, and there's always you can never quite trust relationships the way that you would want to. But Mateo has this thing where if he wants to really trust someone, he will test them. And he will test them in some of the most bizarre, like heartbreaking, terrifying ways. But if you pass his test of loyalty, he will trust you forever. Like, he will have your back if he knows you have his. And that is something that through this series, you get to see him test many different people in many different ways. And his code is very strange, but he's someone that I really appreciate. And I know that a lot of people will not make it all the way to the end of this series. People drop out because the story goes in ways that you don't expect it to go, and you may pick a side. And if you pick the wrong side, you're going to be very unsatisfied with this series. But I picked the right side, as it were, and I absolutely love Sam Mariano's Morelli series because of that. So that was a weird way to talk about it, but if you've read it, you know what I mean. So this is another mob series I love. I also look at that boob grab there. It's so great. So yeah, Sam Mariano, she writes me some twisted boys. I like it. So then I have one, this is actually from a like sci-fi dystopian book. And to be fair, I haven't made it all the way to the end of this series, but like I know that it's a romance series, so he will have an HEA. But after I read this book, I knew that I wanted him to be on my villains list. And that's King Lazuli from the Queen of All That Dies series by Thalassa. So I actually read this book for a reading vlog recently. And this series has a king in it who, again, this is a dystopian. I thought this was a fantasy before I read it, but it's actually like a sci-fi dystopian because we're in a like ruined America and like everything. And he is the king of most of it. And so at the beginning, part of the United States is still kind of like independent, and they need to make a peace deal with him so that we can stop being at war and things like that. And so this woman, Serenity, she's like 19 years old, gets sent as an emissary with her father. Her father's also an emissary, and they get sent to go meet the king. Little does Serenity know that her government is actually hoping that the king will like her and be willing to take her as kind of like a peace offering. And that is kind of what ends up happening. And so she has this crazy hate relationship with him, but he becomes so obsessed with her, and he's willing to like make deals with this other country for her. So it becomes like a forced marriage because he's willing to sign this peace deal if she'll marry him. Again, I haven't finished this series yet. I plan to finish it soon. But just the way that he's set up and the things that he's done to become king, and the more that you find out about him, like, this man is a villain. But when you see him with her, and even though he knows how much she hates him and despises him, he loves her, and he doesn't like hide it. He will say, he like shows his feelings all the time. So it's very interesting, like, juxtaposition, because we're in Serenity's head and we just feel how much hate she has for him, and she has a lot of attraction to him too. Like, she thinks he's very sexy and she can't hide her attraction, but she hates that she likes him and she hates so much about him. And so it's very interesting to read because in her mind, he's the worst villain that there ever was. So then I have a couple historical ones to say. So these are going to be a bit tamer villains. Being historical in nature, they're not quite as evil, but I wanted to give, I like to give recommendations from both sides. So the first one I actually want to mention is Harry Rutledge from Tempt Me at Twilight by Lisa Kleypas. I'm just going to put a picture up of this one because I actually forgot to grab that book, and I'm too lazy to run and get it right now. But Harry Rutledge is a hotel magnate, and we've seen him in a couple other Lisa Kleypas, and he actually sees Poppy accidentally one day. So I believe it's Poppy. Yeah, it's Poppy, who's the like middle sibling in the Hathaways. And he sees her and he immediately wants her. So he runs into her accidentally and gets a hold of a love letter that she's writing to her sweetheart. And he sees her and he wants her. And so he goes about ruining all chances she has to be with her sweetheart, because he believes that he can make her happier and that he can make her his. So he starts out definitely as a villain in Poppy's eyes, because I don't want to like spoil anything, but yeah, she has someone that she wants to be with, but this guy she wants to be with, because her family has kind of a reputation as being kind of wild. Two of her brother-in-laws are half Romani, and so they don't have like the cleanest reputation, and so a lot of people in the upper class like just don't want their families associated with the Hathaways. And so the man that is Poppy's sweetheart, he is a little bit afraid to tell his father his feelings for Poppy. And so Harry kind of uses this as an in to really blow up the whole relationship, and then he can kind of come in as a perceived white knight to be Poppy's husband. But this all happens at the very beginning of the book, because before they marry, Poppy finds out what he has done. And so now she lays down this gauntlet where she's like, all right, well, I'm not going to back out. I'm going to marry you, Harry, but I'm never going to love you. And in fact, I'm going to hate you for ruining my chance with this man who actually loves me. And so I kind of like that, because there's definitely a lot of like seduction that happens then, because he's like, well, I don't need your heart. I just need your body. That's fine. And I just love Lisa Kleypas can take a story like that, and she can take a man that you're like, how can we like this guy? He ruined our heroine's happily ever after, and make it good. And I just love that about her so much. Then I want to talk about someone who, he's not quite a villain, but he definitely has villain tendencies. And that's Dane from Lord of Scoundrels. So this is Sebastian Valier, who's called the Marquis of Dane. And here I'll show you the step back for this one. And he starts out kind of as a villain because he really messes things up for Jessica. So Jessica Trent is determined to get her little brother cleaned up and get him out of the city because he's gambling away their money and he's making a lot of bad choices. And one of the people that he's following around is the Marquis of Dane, and he is being led into a lot of crazy things. And so Jessica, being the practical, smart woman that she is, she goes to Dane and asks him, please stop leading my brother around to these things. I really need him to stop wasting our money and make good decisions. And Dane, there's a little bit more to this. Like there's a petty reason why he gets mad at Jessica, but also he's just so immediately attracted to her that he's angry how attracted he is to her. And he sees how smart she is. And they just have this crazy banter back and forth. And Jessica is so smart. But Dane ends up ruining her reputation and then refusing to marry her in a pretty, like, crazy situation. So Jessica's not going to take that lying down, but we can't talk about that without spoiling things. But I definitely feel like when we're speaking of historical romances, he is someone who starts seriously as a scoundrel who could have really ruined someone's life, and watching him soften and be all squishy and warm for Jessica, it does things to me. And then we couldn't talk about historical villains without talking about Ewan from Daring and the Duke. So this is the third book in the Bare Knuckle Bastard series. I recently just read this trilogy. There's a reading vlog up on my channel now if you want to see my immediate reactions to this, because I can't say too much. Ewan, the Duke of Marwick, is someone that we meet in the beginning of the first book. He's someone that all of our protagonists in this series have had interactions with. They grew up with him for a time in their life, and now we all hate each other. And there is this woman, Grace, who Ewan and her used to love each other when they were young. And the thing that Ewan did to ruin all the relationships also ruined his relationship with Grace and caused her to go into hiding for a very long time. And this book is kind of the culmination of everything. So to me, and again, you can go watch my vlog for this. It is spoiler filled, so know that, because I can't say my full feelings here. But I knew from the beginning that, you know, that this third book was going to be about Ewan. So I knew that the thing couldn't have been completely black and white. Also because Sarah MacLean just knows how to set up those scenarios from the jump. And so she does great character development for these characters, even in the previous two. And so it makes this book really satisfying when you finally get to learn what made this man our villain and how and if and how he can get redemption for those things. So this book was quite a ride. I do say, like, in that vlog that I feel too that, like, this book had just built up so many promises. Like, it's hard to deliver on that. I feel like for the most part it does succeed. But I also, having binged them, like, so close together, there was just a lot of, like, expectation that I had that maybe didn't carry over as much as I wanted it to. But I will say that definitely when we're talking about villains who get an HEA, we see Ewan cause a lot of collateral damage trying to get what he wants. And so some would consider him quite the villain for that. So there you go. I hope this was great. I hope you try some of these amazing books and series that they're involved in. I know not really a lot of these are standalones, but To me, those are the most satisfying villains, are characters that you've seen be villains before they get their happily ever after. Like, besides with Carter, who just starts on the page being a fucking bad person, all the rest of these, like, you need to kind of work your way up to the complete villainy that they have. So there is a little bit of investment that goes with that. But these are some of my favorite dark villains to get into HEA. Let me know who yours are. I absolutely love seeing a turnaround like that, particularly like mafia men, or if there are some in historical romances, like, please leave your recommendations down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe. I put up new content 3 to 4 times a week, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.